We got our new project in today. It's this lovely little Seth Thomas grandfather clock. You could also call it a grandmother clock. It's a little bit smaller, but it's a beautiful little thing. You may have noticed the glass is missing out of the front door. That'll need to be replaced. I actually know a guy, so we won't have to do it ourselves. Over here, we've got all of the parts. You've got the movement, the weights, the face, pendulum, chain. You may notice there is missing chains. We only have one chain, so we'll need to order some new stuff. Pendulum rod will also need a bit of work. This was bent in about 3 different places, kind of odd, but I've already got that straightened out. Pendulum rod will also need a little bit of work. You can see it's been broken, so we'll just get that fixed and glued back together. Pendulum rod and pendulum bob needs to be polished. Movement in it is, I believe, an Urgos. You can tell just by the configuration of the levers and the cams, but interestingly enough, it's actually not branded. The only thing that it has on the back is Seth Thomas, which is really interesting. But anyway, we will get this movement up in the workshop. The reason it's down here in the dining room was so that I didn't have to lug it upstairs. So we'll get it up to the workshop and we'll get working on it, get it all put back together and running nicely. First thing that needs to come off here is this seat board. It's pretty typical, just held in by 2 little lugs and 2 square washers. Those just come off just like this. Interestingly enough, it looks like there's a little bit of glue or some kind of adhesive holding these lugs to the washers, but it just breaks off easily. There we go. With the seat board taken off, we can now look over this movement. Just on first inspection, it's very, very oily. It looks pretty dirty. These are actually some primitive silencing levers. You can, I guess, tie the string down and keep the hammers from hitting. I've never actually seen them functional. We'll first start by taking off this suspension spring. Like always, I like to take it off first just so it doesn't get damaged. It's quite thin metal. Now the pendulum leader can come off with the suspension spring. Very oily. Should never be oil on the suspension spring. This is interesting. It needs to twist and come out like normal, but those arms are stopping me. There we go. Now we can take a closer look at this movement. Like I said before, there's just so much oil. It's very, very oily. But otherwise, doesn't seem too bad. The plates are lacquered, so they're not tarnished. I'll take these hammers off with the chime roller. It's an interesting setup. I've never quite seen one like this. I could have either taken off the ones on the inside or these outside ones, and I opted for these outside ones. There's a lot of what looks to be dried up oil underneath these nuts. There really should never be oil in a place like this. Last thing to come off is this little plate holds springs. I'll need a screwdriver for it. The nuts and screws off of this. Those nuts were really, really dirty. Kind of stiff, and seems like that's the general consensus of things here is just everything's really oily. Yeah, these springs, they have oil just inside of the coils, and so just really, really dirty, really oily. I think this is probably a case of clock started running slow, so the owners just took a bunch of oil and just over-oiled it, trying to get it to run faster. Because there's definitely a lot of oil in this thing. So we'll just continue taking off these hammers and then move on to the front. We'll pull all the levers off the front. First I'll take the rack. And the snail. Along with the intermediate wheel. And we'll take this lever off. Not sure the name of this this one, but this is what keeps the rack from falling back down when it's being lifted. Let's see, we'll put that with the chime. Excuse me, strike. Now, yeah, that one's held in with a brass collar on the inside. Get that taken out. And all the screws in this are really tight. This doesn't seem to have been serviced in a while, or at least serviced properly, because there's definitely a lot of oil here. Okay, set that aside. Now, take this this cam out. So, I'm going to tighten the screw back up so I don't lose it in the ultrasonic. I will be using the ultrasonic cleaner for this clock, even though oh, there goes my birds. Couldn't find a good place to land, apparently. I will be putting this in the ultrasonic. These are lacquered plates, but I have actually since changed out my ultrasonic fluid so that now it is a non-ammoniated solution, so I can throw these in here. We'll just finish taking these off. You may have noticed this clock has a silencing lever, but it does not extend through the face of the clock, which is very odd. So you can't actually turn the silencing lever on or off unless you have the hood pulled off, which is really interesting. And this one is not. There it goes. That was putting up a fight. Have to be careful with that spring there. This one has an E-clip on the rear side, kind of in an awkward spot. Easy peasy. There they go again. Now this can come out. And also it looks like there's another one for the silencing lever here. Yeah, I do have my birds with me. I don't normally have them with me when I work here, but I figured during disassembly it's not too loud, and they're pretty scared of loud noises. Oh, that looks like that's just a screw there, so just a little tensioning washer. Keep the lever in place. Just comes right out. There's so much oil underneath of this lever and just generally all over this clock. You really don't need that much oil. Honestly, I don't even oil these. I know there's a lot of friction. It is metal on metal, but you're not constantly moving the lever back and forth unless you're silencing it every night. But even still, it really won't wear in any significant way. So now that we've got everything pulled off, we need to get the gathering pellet off as well, of course. This is how I like to do it. I don't have any pulling levers, but if you just take two screwdrivers underneath it and gently pry it off. You don't want to bend the arbor that it's on, of course. I might have to do this off camera so I don't have to work around it. And there they go. So yeah, that's gathering pellet. Now that is everything. This is ready to be disassembled. Got all those nuts off. Now this is ready to just slide out. Oh, things are falling. Oh, looks like I might need to take that bridge off. Oh, maybe not. There we go. I normally don't like to take those off because then that can mess with the depthing of the escapement. Here's the anchor. Looks in pretty good condition. Just a little bit of a shiny spot, but honestly it's fine. Let's see. Escapement wheel, obviously. Looks like this is also part of the time train. I try to keep things from falling off as much as possible, because then obviously it makes it a pain to try and figure out where they went originally. It's part of the reason why filming is very handy for clock repair or watch repair or whatnot. You have a nice video you can look back to and see what went where. So now these wheels can all come off. It's part of the strike side. The chain wheels. Now this has a pin on it. Looks like it's probably part of the oh well, here's another one with a pin on it. So this is probably to the strike side. This one to the chime side. The rest of these chime wheels pulled out. This is an interesting governor, especially since the one in the the strike side is a traditional one. There it is. Yeah, that's interesting that it has two different kinds. This one looks like one of those ones that will open up as it spins faster, like a traditional governor. I have not seen these in clocks yet, but now I have. The rest of the chain wheels off. This one is the chime. Time. Okay. And we'll get that other wheel pulled off. I'm hoping with so much oil that's in this, although it does look a little dirty, so that might be a cause for concern with bushings and pivot holes, but I'm hoping that it won't have too many. It doesn't seem to be too terribly bad. Just really, really dirty, thick oil. All right, now this is ready for cleaning. You can just see how much junk is just built up on the plates and around each pivot hole. And it's interesting on these clocks, when you pull them open, more often than not, the old oil that's there will be green. And I used to think that that was just, they used a green oil in the factory, but when brass deteriorates, it actually is a composite metal, it's an alloy. It has copper in it, and when copper oxidizes, it turns green or blue. And so I'm pretty sure that that's what the green oil indicates, is that the copper in the actual brass is oxidizing and then showing itself in the oil. But that's just a personal theory. Anyway, we'll get this all cleaned up. Our clock and the earth are clean and dry. I'll partially reassemble them, reassemble it, and check for wear in the pivot holes. Start first with the chime side. Of course, always the fun puzzle of figuring out how it goes back together. Here's all the wheels back in the chime side, and to be honest with you, I can't really see any extensive wear. There is just a tiny bit in the, let's see, that would be the 5th wheel. But I don't think that it needs to be rebushed. It's moves around a little bit, but it really isn't that bad. Same story for all of the other pivots here. They're surprisingly pretty well off. This clock must not be as old. It, like I said, it doesn't have a brand, it just has Seth Thomas. And I've never heard of A. Tally Industries. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, that's good news, at least for the chime side. We will make sure that all of the other ones don't need redoing. And if they do, we'll redo them. Well, I've gone through and checked all of the, planning on showing you, but oh well. Gone through and checked all of the pivot holes, and really none of them warrant rebushing. There's just a little bit of wiggle room in some of the higher movement wheels, but really they're not that bad. So we don't need to do anything with them, and also the pivots are sufficiently polished, so hardly any work to be done on this clock. So really, I think all we really need to do is just reassemble it and order some chain for it, because that's really why it wasn't running, just because of the lack of chain. Before we can reassemble an oil, we need to peg out these pivot holes. And in the meantime, I figured I would share what I've learned about A. Tally. So the company Seth Thomas, which was a case manufacturer, very, very popular brand. You'll see their name all over the place if you work on clocks. In the late 60s, 1968, A. Tally & Co. actually bought Seth Thomas. And then they continued making clocks for a few years. And then in the 90s, they stopped producing clocks and focused more on their aerospace sales, which I thought was very interesting. But kind of sad, honestly. Seth Thomas was a very big name in clockmaking, and got bought up in the 60s. I didn't even know that. But now we all know. So anyway, we will clean up these pivot holes, make them all nice and pretty again. Then we will reassemble and oil. One important thing that I don't really show very well when I video picking out the holes is once you're done pegging out the pivot holes, you need to go through with a brush or some other utensil and just brush away any debris that you see. As you can see, the wood will actually leave a little bit of debris, so I just come in with just a cheap paintbrush and just brush it off. And also, you may have noticed I'm using this, I usually use toothpicks to peg out the pivot holes, very cheap. This is a manicure stick for the bigger stuff. You just whittle it down to size, and then you can use it to peg out some of the bigger holes. It's time to reassemble now, and as you may notice, I am wearing gloves. Like I said before many times, these plates are lacquered, so your oily fingerprints won't actually do any damage, but it is unprofessional, obviously, to have fingerprints all over. So I wear gloves whenever I'm reassembling. I have really, really oily, greasy fingers, and so my fingerprints get everywhere, so I just prefer to wear gloves. With the last wheel in, we can finally bring the top plate in and start the fun process of lining up all of the pivot holes to the pivots. I found what's easiest for me is to hold the movement up pretty much close to eye level. Then you can actually see what pivots need to move where, what pivots actually hanging up, and what direction they need to move to actually go into the hole. After all that work getting everything all lined up, I didn't get it lined up right. These two wheels are upside down. So the whole thing will have to come apart, and we'll have to redo that. Now that all the wheels are back in and properly oriented, we can move on to oiling. And as you can see, just each pivot just gets a little dab of oil. That's all it really needs. You shouldn't fill the oil cups. Never a good idea. That just attracts dust. We also need to oil the escapement, so each third or so tooth gets a little drop of oil. Now we can reassemble the levers on the front. With this cam installed, we can see whether or not the shutoff will function as it should. And as you can see, it is not. Instead of the train wheel stopping when the lever has dropped down into those grooves on the cam, it just continues to go. Eventually I found out what the problem was. It was the lever was not dropping far enough to actually stop, and so we just needed to loosen it, adjust it, and retighten it. As you can see now, it works just fine. With the chime side functioning as it should, we can move on to the strike side, starting with the rack and snail. Before we put the snail on our tube, we need to oil up the minute post. It needs to be oiled, and also the intermediate wheel. It's important that your snail is aligned with your lifting cam, so that's what I'm doing here. Right after the hour cam has passed, it needs to be aligned so that the rack will fall in the very middle of a step on the snail. We can now put the gathering pallet and the rack hook installed. First need to find out where the gathering pallet needs to be, and then install it there. The strike side is working properly, so now we need to make sure that warning also works on the strike side. Everything's good there, so now I can move on to installing the hammers. With the hammers all installed, we can now make sure that it is actually striking the right sequence. this wheel got stuck, so I've got to pry it back forward to where it will engage, and also it's upside down right now, so it needs to be pulled off. Everything is looking good. Now we can move on to installing these primitive silencers here, silencing levers. And I noticed that the E-clips are the smaller size. There's two sizes of E-clip in this, and I realized that I actually put the small one on the wheel on the inside when it needs a big one, and then that small one actually goes on this other silencing lever. So I'm just switching those out. Finally, the suspension spring and pendulum leader can be reinstalled. The final things that need done are chains and the seat board, but we will wait until the chains come to do that. Now, I said I wasn't going to put any grease or oil on this silencing lever here, but I think I actually might. There's just so much friction. You can probably even hear it. There's just a lot there. And so I'm just going to take a little bit of Molly coat and just apply it just a tiny little bit. It really doesn't need a whole lot. Just on the actual surface of the plate here. Nothing like what there was on there before. Just to give it a little bit of something, just to take a bit of that edge off. And honestly, this Molly coat might be a little light for this application, but that is just so much better already. Just put just a tiny bit more. And like I said before, it really doesn't matter any damage that that's going to do to it, but that certainly is going to be a lot better. While we wait for the chain to come, we can turn our attention to the pendulum. I've actually already fixed the pendulum rod, just needed some wood glue and clamped it down while it dried, so that's good to go. Now, what we're going to do to this pendulum bob, you can see it seems like the lacquer has failed. Came off entirely, so it just needs to be polished up. So I'm going to take my metal polish and paper towel. I use Flitz, and I'm just going to polish up this pendulum bob. Here, the brass started to look a lot more silvery than gold, and I had my hunches, and so I grabbed a magnet. It is probably a brass plated steel, and so if we continue to polish that, then the whole thing will just turn silver, and that's definitely not what we want. So I'm just going to leave this as is. Honestly, I think I might just keep this clock. I don't think I'll sell it or anything like that, so I'll probably just leave this as is. Don't want to take the rest of the brass off and can't really do anything else to clean it up. So we'll just leave it as is. With the pendulum out of the way, we can focus on the hands, namely the minute hand. The hour hand is just fine, but we will repaint it along with this one. As you can see, there's a splotch here where the paint has come off. When I got this clock, the hand was super crooked and really bent, and you can see it's still kind of crooked, but the metal is starting to fatigue there, so if I tried to bend it, then it would just break. So this is good enough. It's pointing straight, so this will just have to do. But if we look closer at that little spot where the paint is missing, there's all sorts of what looks to be bite marks. It's super banged up, dented, and divoted, so we'll need to polish those out before we can repaint. And also we need to focus on the bushing. So if we bring the movement in here and we put the hand on, you can see the hand just swivels on its bushing. It doesn't actually engage. And so what we need to do, this clock has just dropped the hour. I made sure that the hour has just struck. So we need to make absolutely sure that this is 100% as straight as we can get it. And of course there will be some wiggle room because the hand nut is not, or the hand bushing is not perfectly machined to the exact square that the post it sits on is. But what I like to do is just get this little bit of wiggle room to where the middle of the wiggle room is lined up with the middle of it. And I'm using the escapement as a guide. Probably looks a little crooked on camera, but I'm looking at it straight on. So about right there is good. So now what I'm going to do, you can see in the past someone has hammered on this and that hammering has failed. Obviously the nut is loose again. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to Loctite this. I'm just going to put a little bit of Loctite in there. And so I'll go ahead and do that right now. Just got in today along with the hooks and tabs and the works. So we'll open it up, have a look. So this is just like the original, it is brass plated steel. So you can see I actually bought 3 of them because this is just, doesn't look as good anymore. Obviously all the brass is worn off of it. And the stops and hooks and everything that I got, you may notice, are different than what's here. These are actually Harmony style, and obviously the original are Urgos. They were out of stock, time savers, out of stock of the hooks that I needed, and honestly, just not worth it for me to wait. Like I said before, I think I'm just going to keep this clock, and so I don't care whether the hooks on it are original to the clock or not, and especially on a clock that's as new as this one. It's not like any vintage valuable antique or anything like that. So definitely just going to go with functionality over proper restoration on this one. Anyway, so what we'll do now is we will get these chains all set up and ready to be installed, and that entails just putting on the hooks and the tab and the stop on them. And then we'll be ready to put the movement in the case. Here we've got the movement back into the case and mounted on the seat board, but not tightened down yet. Before we can tighten this down, we need to make sure that the hammers are aligned. It looks like they are from this side. And from that side as well. Everything looks good, so we can go ahead and tighten down these feet and tighten down the seat board. These wing nuts and washers are not original to this clock. When I left the thrift shop where I bought this, I thought that I had gotten everything, but I apparently had left the wing nuts. They were nice too because they had a wide base, so they counted as both a wing nut and the washer. But when I got home, I realized that, oh, I don't have those anymore, and I know for a fact that I took them off because I partially disassembled this to get it home, so my stupid brain forgot to grab the wing nuts, so these are just replacements. With the seat board mounted, pendulum hanging, chains are hanging, we can test to see if this will run over its own power. Let's see if I can do this with one hand, probably not. Aha. Okay. Another important thing we need to check while the weights are in is if they'll foul the pendulum. Should be hanging just behind it. Looks to be good. Very out of beat. That's all right. We'll get that adjusted, and hopefully this clock will run for us. I see no reason as to why it shouldn't. Some of you may be wondering what setting the beat is like, so I'll go ahead and show it. This is the anchor, the escapement. Obviously, as it swings back and forth, it releases a tooth. And so this behind here, this silver disc, is the clutch. So you can actually just move this independently of the pendulum, but of course that's not what you want. You want the the pendulum swing to be in line with this so that it's a nice even tick tock, tick tock. That's almost there. And as you can see, it's pretty sensitive. It takes just a little bit of a nudge to get either in or out of beat. That's sounding pretty good. Here are the weights for the chime and strike side. You can see they're labeled left and right. That is important. The one on the left will almost always be the lightest one of the three weights, and the one on the right will more often than not be the heaviest of the three. The one in the middle, it can be either way. It just depends on the movement. For this one in particular, I'm pretty sure it weighs the same as the left one. But sometimes it can be a heavier one and weigh the same as the right one. But in any case, the one on the left will always be the lightest. The one on the right will always be the heaviest. With all three weights hanging now, we can see how it's going to sound. So I will activate it just by lifting this lever up. Oh, well, actually it's in 3/4 phase right now, so I need to lift both of these levers. Okay, the hourly strike sounds fine. All the hammers are hitting properly. Quarterly strikes sound a little fast, and I know it probably has something to do with this governor. Like I said before, I've never seen this kind of governor before, and obviously it doesn't cause as much drag as it should. Like this other one, obviously it has a lot of surface area, a lot of room to catch air, but this one's just kind of a weird one. So I'm not sure what I can do to slow that down. For now, I suppose we'll just leave it be. But anyway, now with everything all properly in the case, we can start putting the face back on. And on this one, it's kind of annoying. There's these four, they just look like thumbtacks, to be honest, little nails. But they hold the face on, and then the face board has 4 screws. And would you believe it, on the way home, I actually lost another one of those screws. Thankfully, it's just one, so it won't be that big of a deal, but it's just annoying. I can't believe how forgetful I am. Something strikes me as being very wrong with this governor. I've got these 2 little metal tabs that were on it taken off. On all of the photos of similar Urgos movements, they have an actual governor, like this side, to actually catch air and slow down the train. But on this one, and doesn't obviously, and these look ragged, like they've been cut off. So my guess is that someone has taken this and done quote-unquote work on it and just totally removed the governor. So I am going to take some sheet brass and remake that governor. All right, we've got our governor back up in the workshop. So I looked up similar movements, and here's a photo that I found. And as you can see, the governor is what you'd expect from a governor. It's a wide sheet of brass to catch air and slow the clock down. But this one appears to have been either cut or broken. I wish that I knew the story, because that is just very odd that would have happened. Anyway, so I'll take some measurements from the arbor, and then we'll cut it out from our sheet brass. This brass is a little bit thinner than what's originally on here, but it'll do just fine. Here's our piece of brass that we cut out, ready to be shaped and fitted to this fly or governor. If we take a closer look at the photo of the original, it looks like each half of the fan is its own piece of brass, and then it's held in tension with a spring on top. I don't think I'll be able to do that, mainly just because this brass is thinner than the original brass, and so it won't really grip onto the arbor as well. And so I'm just going to make this a more traditional kind of governor. Just gonna shape the brass around the arbor, and then that'll friction fit it. But of course I'll also stamp holes in it and put these pins through it so that it grabs onto that. little brass bar there. So we'll just get started on that. Here's our new governor. As you can see, it's a little crude and unpolished, but you know, like I said earlier, I'm not really looking for a complete restoration per se, as more of just a repair for this clock. So it'll do just well. So let's go put it in the clock and see how it does. There's that new governor installed there. So we'll see how it sounds now. That is worlds better, and it isn't hitting anything on the inside either, so I'd say that's a job well done there. And one other thing we need to do while we're here is to re-oil the pivots for that wheel. When you displace them, you need to re-oil them, so we'll go ahead and do that. The paint on the hands have dried, so now they're ready to be installed. And I said I was going to Loctite the bushing on the minute hand. What I ended up having to do was just pull the bushing out, clean it up a little bit, and then just repeen it into place. There was oil in between the bushing and the hand, and don't know why. Should never be oil anywhere near the hands, but so anyway, had to pull it out, get it cleaned up, and then I ended up just repeening it in place. And you can see, turned out nice and clean and shiny again, nice and black. And you may notice there's an extra piece here. This is a tension washer with this hand nut. This is the only hand nut that I have that will fit onto this clock. It's the one that came with it. But when it's there, it won't apply pressure to the actual hands as it should. Hand nuts are supposed to screw down onto the hand and friction fit it into place. But for whatever reason, this one will not, and so we need this tension washer between the hand nut and the hand. So anyway, we will go down and put these on the clock. Here's the clock all put back together, sans the door. We're still waiting on it, but that'll be perfect. That'll give us time to actually time and regulate this clock. Give it about 2 or so weeks, and then see if it's running on time or not. I bet you that it won't be, because we had to reinstall the pendulum bob. But anyway, once that door comes in, this will be a completed project. We finally got our door back in with the new piece of glass. The people I took it down to, they were quite busy, backed up by a few weeks. And so here we are, nearly a month later, with it all finished. And we can finally say that this clock is complete. You know, we got pretty lucky and unlucky at the same time with this clock. Lucky in the sense that the movement didn't need hardly any work, really, just needed a cleaning. It probably would have ran if it had all the chains, and that's where we're unlucky, is we had to replace the chains and also the governor and a few other parts and pieces. So lucky in the sense that we didn't have to do much work, unlucky in the sense that we had to replace a lot of stuff. But otherwise, this turned out quite nicely. I really liked having this in my dining room. So like I said earlier, I think I may keep this clock and just enjoy it. But there we are.